Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our third session, titled International Coordination on North Korea, will now begin. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you to the Asan Institute for this spectacular conference program and for the invitation to moderate a panel of distinguished experts on this important topic. When you start to ask the question, though, what exactly is meant by international coordination? Well, this is one definition of international. These are four very important countries that are represented by mostly non-officials, in case an official speaking perhaps in his personal capacity. Coordination of what is also an important question. Clearly, coordination is not a North Korean problem. Coordination, though, is very much a problem of all of us and the rest of the international community. Coordination may be the easy part. Making coordination effective and effective on purpose on issues that matter internationally, those are more difficult challenges. And that's what this panel is going to discuss. It really raises questions about what should the ends be of focused, effective international coordination on North Korea. We've heard already in this morning's conference that perhaps it should focus on achieving a moratorium on nuclear and missile tests. That's fairly precise. The resumption of six-party talks is another more precise objective. But the larger questions about securing longer-term peace and moving toward reunification, those are much wider objectives that I doubt international coordination is going to make much headway on soon. But even talking about all of these issues, including just what North Korea is up to and where it's heading, politically, economically, militarily, that's a type of coordination that clearly most countries would find beneficial. The means of coordination, of diplomacy and information, everybody in this room has something like this and is using it probably right now. Imagine if everybody in North Korea had something like this and could get access to the information that the rest of the world has. So information coordination could be one means of thinking about something beyond what has happened diplomatically or economically or militarily. And then the ways of organizing is also a question that occurred to me, because we have represented on this panel people who are deeply expert on foreign affairs, knowledgeable about Asian politics and diplomacy, knowledgeable about the law and military issues, and a military professional who understands really what it takes to have military plans and operations and to coordinate internationally. These are very different skill sets. It's different from putting together the special envoys for North Korea, for instance, or the foreign ministries to talk about North Korea. It's really asking for a much more whole-of-government approach, a larger approach. So these are the kinds of questions I'm hoping this distinguished panel will discuss, and we'll discuss North Korea in light of the current situation. North Korea keeps changing its pace from provocation to suddenly peace offensive. We have internationally Iran on a charm offensive. We have Syrian red lines that have not been read after all. These are the kinds of externalities that may be affecting our thinking about North Korea. Each speaker will speak for roughly 10 minutes, and we will, after a brief introduction, start with Professor Shulong, who's Deputy Director of the Institute of International Strategic and Development Studies at Tsinghua University, an extraordinarily distinguished career as an analyst, directing at Kicker, at Tsinghua University, well-traveled and knows the Americans better than we know the Americans, and is really just a heavyweight of Chinese experts thinking about this region. Next will be my good friend Gordon Flake, who's been the executive director of the Mansfield Foundation for a number of years, and he really has taken this center and made it the focus of thinking about engaging Northeast Asia and the United States, and it's been a very effective institution under Gordon's leadership. He's a frequent writer. He knows the policy community in Washington, but he really lives in Northeast Asia, and he does this in Montana as well, which is an amazing feat. Dr. Shin is now the Director General for Policy Planning at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, but before that, having a distinguished series of titles at the main Korean Defense Institute, KAIDA, Korean Institute for Defense Analyses, and somebody, again, who knows the United States very well. Washington's virtually second home, having graduated from Georgetown Law. And then finally, Noboru Yamaguchi, who's a retired Ground Self-Defense Force Lieutenant General, held the top intellectual job, really, in the Ground Self-Defense Forces after he had been Senior Defense Attaché in Washington. He knows all of these countries in this region so well because he's there every week, traveling throughout them. He's currently, right now, a professor and director for international programs of the National Defense Academy of Japan. So with that brief introduction, let me turn to Professor Chu for the initial set of comments.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I think that the international cooperation or coordination on North Korea has been here in East Asia or in the world for more than decades or 2 decades. And there are various channels for coordination, bilateral, including summit between ROK and China, summit meeting, senior official talk between US and China, Russia and China, and certainly among US alliance, US, Japan, South Korea. But to my observation, the coordination is still at a very early stage. We countries have interest on Korea Peninsula, North Korea, those 5 countries, or 3 or 4. I think we have as much common interest goal and as the same level of difference. So we both have the will to coordinate it, but we have a difficulty to coordinate it. I think first the difficulty is a different approach or different assessment about North Korea. Right now, or for years, US, ROK, perhaps also Japan, regard the North Korean nuclear missile program as very serious and immediate threat. But for China, see that is a long-term problem. It's not an immediate threat. So there's a different sense of urgency on North Korea issues. What are the kind of issues in nature? And there's a difference on the agenda. China, perhaps also Russia, are now also including North Korea. They want to resume 6-party talks as a major job. Engagement talks. And China also emphasizes stability. Stability including whole Northeast Asia, whole Korea Peninsula, and DPRK stability. And this might not be agenda of other members for coordination, US or ROK or Japan. So when we set a meeting, when countries meet, leaders meet, we have the same topic about North Korea, but we have a different assessment. We have a different agenda. We have a different assessment of those. So I think that is a problem. Second, right now or in near future, the agenda or the issues for coordination are different. My understanding of Chinese government, and they like to go ahead with UN security sanctions against North Korea, including the February one this year. So that's the coordination, the line China put. And China understands other countries might like go beyond that line, UN Security Council line, to make new efforts against growing North Korea nuclear and missile threat. And I think Chinese government is not ready for doing something against North Korea beyond the UN Security Council sanction, the items. So I think that, and also China think there's a legitimacy issue. If we go beyond the UN Security Council line, then which is legitimacy? how can we face North Korea say that is right to do against North Korea, because there is no United Nations decision, authorization. So I see that is the difference. And next one, I do think that as an observer on the issue, I do think this, I myself may be different from my government. I do think North Korea poses immediate, serious threat. There's an urgent job we need to do to contain. If we cannot stop North Korea threat our growing missile capability, nuclear capability, they need more things to be done. So here, I do see that China is hesitant to do something concrete to deal with the growing North Korea nuclear and missile threat. China keeps that goal of denuclearization of North Korea or Korea Peninsula. That is quite clear. But China sees that is a final goal. Might be a goal in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. It's a final goal. So there's no urgency there. While other members of the coordinated parties like ANKC and the US think it's quite urgent to stop. So agree with the sentiment that the threat is serious, is immediate, is growing. So we need to do something concrete. So here, my proposal, my suggestion, I think as I talk with American friends, I think we need more dialogue, consultation, including at the top level between ANKC and China, between US and China. And then I think ANKC and the US have the job to convince Chinese side, convince Chinese leaders, government officials, that this is a very serious problem. To make Chinese decision-makers believe this is an urgent threat, it's an urgent problem, it's a serious, it's a dangerous threat. We must work now, must work concretely. And it's difficult because the Chinese relation with North Korea is different from relation like between other countries in North Korea. China has one of the obstacles of Chinese hesitation is an internal debate among Chinese. Like basically two schools, like abandoning North Korea school or not abandoning North Korea school. Abandoning North Korea school say, North Korea is so bad, so crazy, there's no hope. So we must abandon North Korea. We must oppose everything bad North Korea does. Do not care about the bilateral relations. And another school, not abandoning school, say, yes, North Korea sometimes behave bad. We should be tough with them. But sometimes, like last 2 months, it was okay. North Korea was not bad all the time. So when North Korea behave badly, we need to be tough with them. But if there's some hope, North Korea can engage, can work with the others, we should give the chance to North Korea. We should engage them, should encourage them. So I think the second school is a main school in China, in Chinese foreign policy circle, government, academic, news media, general public. The abandoning school is a minority. So that can be our internal political, North Korea, I myself see, it's an internal political issue of China too. It's not just from policy issue. Not to say socialism capacity role, same ideology and others sympathy. So I think the only way we can coordinate more, coordinate better, is through strategic dialogue, through efforts to try to understand each other, try to convince each other, then we can reach a goal. I do have some hope because when I work on U.S. China relations for decades, I do see in the past through dialogue, through engagement, that China was getting closer with some issues like non-proliferation, like CTBT, like Iran, nuclear or chemical relations with Iran, and others. So I do see this possibility that we can make a concrete progress in coordination on North Korea, especially on the real threat of the North Korea nuclear and missile program. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Exactly 10 minutes, and you, I think, reiterated the point that I tried to make, that indeed assessments of what North Korea is up to are a first-order problem for coordination. That then you get into the different issues that countries are trying to coordinate continues to be a divisive one or a difficult one. The fact that there's a different layer of urgency here with China is something that has changed, it seems, since last December, when China has talked about more common concern about the threat posed by North Korea's provocations. And this is an opening, you're saying. So it's interesting that Professor Chu is talking about bilateral coordination, even using the US-ROK alliance to convince the Chinese that they should share more urgency about this threat posed by North Korea. And it's also interesting implicitly in what you said, that when others say, China, let's coordinate on North Korea policy, there's a certain threat to the China view over, does this mean we have to abandon North Korea, the North Korean school or not? And that issue, as opposed to come with us and support sanctions against bad behavior, not necessarily abandoning the North Korean school, something in between the extremes that might be posed. Anyway, Gordon Flake, you're next.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. It's good to be back at Asan, and I wanted to extend, like the other participants, my thanks for the Asan for organizing this group. This is a very impressive panel, and what I would hope to do is kind of lay out some contextual perspectives on what we mean by international policy coordination, and then look at some of the specific questions that are foremost in my mind. You know, the role of China in policy coordination, the impact on recent tensions between Korea and Japan on policy coordination, the impact of Korea's most recent kind of outreach and Korea's policy on coordinating with the United States, and then wrap up with some conclusions. First and foremost, in terms of context, it's important to realize, and this may seem elementary, but that policy coordination is a lot easier to do when nothing is happening, right? You often hear that, the military battle plans, never go beyond the first contact with the enemy. In the same way, policy coordination in North Korea is relatively simple to do if you're trying to align policies that are designed to do nothing, right? That don't require a proactive element. And the correlation to the corollary to that is that, of course, that when our primary objective in terms of coordinating policy is to punish North Korea or to react to their provocations, that too is relatively easy. The challenge is, and historically this has been the case as well, is that when we're being more proactive, when we're moving, when we're engaging North Korea, then different priorities come in and it becomes much more difficult to challenge or to coordinate the policy. In some respects, for the last year, North Korea has made policy coordination on North Korea quite easy. If we think just back to the March and April timeframe, the North Korean rhetoric, at least, was so over the top. Threatening, asking the Russian and the British delegations to take the diplomats out of Pyongyang because war was about to start, calling for all, businessmen to leave the Korean peninsula because war was about to start, and then that kind of over-the-top rhetoric really made it almost indefensible, even in China or Moscow, to kind of be proactively defending North Korean actions at that time. And as a result, there was a relative unanimity in terms of that there had to be some type of response. Again, I'll just reiterate here that the challenge is when you move beyond that kind of lowest common denominator approach and come up with a proactive, what do we do? And that's true either with more proactive efforts to go beyond just doing nothing and have more proactive sanctions, which China would be uncomfortable with, and likewise, if you had more proactive engagement. Either one of those makes policy coordination more difficult. So let me talk about first the six-party talks, and then I'll move on to talking about China, Korea-Japan relations, etc. I titled this segment, the six-party talks are dead, long live the six-party talks. It's this weird situation where we haven't had a six-party talk meeting for so long, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody, probably in this room or in any of our countries, that really holds out any hope of a resumption of the six-party talks, and yet the official position of all of our governments is that the six-party talks are alive and well, and we need to support them, at least in concept. And there are reasons for that, of course. The six-party talks are the last forum in which North Korea has made it a commitment to the other five parties to abandon its nuclear weapons, clearly. And so obviously holding them to that commitment is an important element of it, and it's the one way that our countries can say that we do not accept North Korea as a nuclear power. The moment we say, okay, the six-party talks are dead, we essentially accept the North Korean assertion that they are a nuclear power, and we kind of give them that get-out-of-jail-free kind of card. And so as a result, we kind of keep up the lip service in that regard. One of the key questions that was posed in this program was the question of whether or not the policy coordination on North Korea would be the nascent beginnings of some type of a regional security framework. And I found that to be a somewhat anachronistic question. It depends on how you look at it. I mean, if you looked at this issue back in the heady days of the six-party talks in 2005, 2006, there was a lot of people writing papers, including myself, that thought, look, if this goes well, then the six-party talks itself could evolve into some type of a regional security mechanism. Built into the September 19, 2005 joint statement was a notion of a Northeast Asian peace and security mechanism. Again, that was on a very proactive element. At this juncture, it's almost impossible for me to imagine, on a proactive element, this leading to a regional security mechanism involving North Korea as a nuclear power. And so there is a fundamental precondition in that process of North Korea abandoning its nuclear ambitions. However, I would say that doesn't necessarily remove the opportunity for some broader coordination between the other five parties that could still evolve into a regional security apparatus which does not accept North Korea as a nuclear power. So again, it's some type of a five-party mechanism. If North Korea continues to go back down to a more provocative standpoint, that coordination process is there. And the other thing I would point out about the six-party talks is despite the fact that there has not been a plenum meeting for so long, in many respects the six-party talks are alive and well. Chinese diplomats, who have specific responsibility for this North Korea issue, spend all their time going to Tokyo and Seoul and Washington and Moscow. And likewise, American diplomats go to the other five parties. And so that process of coordination among the other five parties is in many respects alive and well, and it's kind of built into the concept as you go forward, which is really kind of, at this point, the focus of international coordination. Let me move on to talk about China. I was attending a couple years ago a conference in Germany, which was focused, as a conference in Berlin, and the title was Creative Destructionism and the International System, a very European kind of topic, right? And of course, all the Americans in the conference kept saying, you're talking about China, right? And the Europeans said, no, we're just talking about potential threats to the global system. And the Americans said, well, China, right? I mean, this is really all about China, right? Because in our construct, there was few other countries that really had the capacity or intent or ability to really challenge the system on a systemic level. So if I look at this question of international policy coordination on North Korea, in some respects, it's all about China, right? Among our allies, there's not major policy coordination difficulties with Japan or with South Korea. And to be honest, Russia has a very unique role to play here because of the long history of U.S. and Russia coordination and arms control agreements. In other words, in some respects, with the Russians, we speak the same language in responding to nuclear issues and responding to missile and other arms control issues. And so there's a level of seriousness in the Russian responses in the UN and the Russian responses to North Korean provocations that we don't necessarily have with the Chinese. And so in some respects, it's all about China. When we're talking about policy coordination, the fundamental question remains, how do we coordinate better with China? How do we convince China to be more supportive of a relatively unanimous approach on the other side to respond more robustly to North Korean provocations, missile tests, nuclear tests, etc. And I thought it was very interesting that Professor Shulong kept talking about China not being willing to go beyond the UN Security Council line. Of course, that kind of ignores the fact that China plays a very important role in setting what the UN Security Council line is. And so really the front lines of this policy coordination have been, for the last 10 years, a focus on the UN Security Council and how much that we can get out of that in terms of a meaningful response to North Korean actions, both on the missile program and the nuclear program. My general view of the Chinese role thus far is that it is not, from an American perspective, sufficient, right? But at the same point, I think it's very important for us not to kind of get into this notion that somehow that the China and the U.S. are on very different pages, because the truth is, if you look at where we have come from, the amount of convergence between the U.S. and China on North Korea over the last decade is nothing short of historic. If you would have asked me 10 years ago if I believed that China would have supported 3 or 4 UN Security Council sanctions resolutions, that I would have believed that China would sign on to 2 different UN presidential statements against its ally, North Korea, that imperfect though it may be, China would be implementing at least some key elements of those sanctions. It would have been very hard for me to imagine that 10 years ago. And more importantly, I would point out that while at times it's very easy to get frustrated when we see certain elements of the Chinese failure to coordinate, as we would view it from an ally's perspective, as frustrating. On the other hand, I think it's important to note that the long-term trend lines in China, I think, are pretty well set. There are 2 different schools of this in Washington, D.C. There's the one school that says China's never going to change. It has its own strategic interest in North Korea. No matter what North Korea does, China's going to back them. I tend to be much more of the evolutionary school, that if you look at what's going on inside China right now, that every action North Korea takes at the more provocative level makes it harder and harder for the Chinese leadership to help North Korea, even if they want to. And I see the UN Security Council sanctions and the presidential statements and each action as a growing body of international law and precedent, which makes it a new foundation upon which any future response has to be built. It's more difficult. Now again, not perfect, but in general, if you look at the trend lines, it's there. And then more particularly, if you look at just this past March and April, now things have eased for the last several months, but if you look at the public reaction within China to what's going on in North Korea, the reaction among scholars, it's hard to make the case that the long-term trend lines are in North Korea's favor in that regard. And again, as Professor Chu mentioned, there clearly is a debate in that regard. I'm running short on time, so I just want to make a couple of other short comments that I think are useful in helping us at least put on the table the issues we're facing us. One is a concern I have, a growing concern about Korea-Japan cooperation. Thus far, this has not been that big of an issue because we've been in a relatively static situation. But the deterioration of Korea-Japan relations over the last year, related primarily to historical legacy issues, has had a detrimental effect on the ability of the United States to coordinate with its 2 allies in responding to North Korea. So the failure last year of Korea to pass a very low-level base general sharing of military intelligence agreement with Japan, is just emblematic of a failure to move on to much more active and proactive efforts to kind of share intelligence and to coordinate responses to what's going on in terms of North Korean provocations. And so that's an area that I think I should flag to put on the table that we should be discussing as we talk about policy coordination. The final point in terms of country-specific thing, of course, is that on the inter-Korean front, this movement on Kaesong is, again, a prime example of where there is a potential for some challenge, as if one party begins to move out ahead of the other. So far, I mean, obviously, as we see in the newspapers today and yesterday, progress on Kaesong, progress on restarting Kumgangsan, progress on family visits is going to be slow and painful and difficult. And so at this point, I don't see any alarm bells ringing in Washington, D.C. in that process. My final and concluding comment will be this, though, is that in general, I've long believed that the Obama administration has not had and does not have a North Korea policy. It really has a Northeast Asia policy. And what I mean by that is that the United States' strategic interest in the region is not in Pyongyang. Our strategic interests are in maintaining the peace, security, and stability of Northeast Asia as a whole. And in that, our relationships with our allies, Korea and Japan, are paramount. Our relationship with China and Russia are extremely important. And so if you think about it, our real national interests could be or could not be served by improving relations with North Korea. But the thing that is key is that process of policy coordination to make sure that no matter what happens in North Korea, whether it reforms and opens as we might hope, or whether it collapses, or whether it lashes out, that it does not become an item of contestation between the United States and others in the region, but rather an area of cooperation, particularly international policy coordination. So I will stop my remarks there. Thanks.
Well, Gordon, thank you very much. When you said that North Korea was the chief instigator of improving coordination internationally, you're absolutely right, and yet I'm thinking of Andrei Lankov's new book where he dissects the fact that North Korea is so good at manipulating everybody on the outside, back from the Soviet Union in the olden days to China and the rest of us today. So it seems to know where to stop with some of these provocations and then start to pick off these differences. And so when you mentioned Kaesong possibly splintering even the USROK on what's the priority next for dealing with North Korea, we constantly have a challenge of coordinating ourselves, it seems, on the outside. The six-party talks is, I thought you followed this issue closely for a long time, but I am struck by what two former assistant secretaries of state told me in the last week separately. And one of them that we should be going back to six-party talks because there's really no alternative and we should be testing North Korea. And the other one saying, I'm not sure why we should be doing that, but because we don't have a North Korean policy, we wouldn't know when to go anyhow. I won't tell you which one said which statement, but there's some disarray even in thinking about trying to catch up with North Korea, trying to just figure out what North Korea are we dealing with? Are we dealing with a North Korea that's resumed the Kaesong, or are we dealing with a North Korea that fired the third nuclear test in the rocket launches this past year? All about China certainly resonates in Washington, as you know, very much, that there's a lot of focus on testing Chinese intentions. China's been much more vocal. And I like the way you put it again, Gordon, in terms of the middle of the road, making it harder for China to support North Korea when North Korea acts badly. Because in Washington, just recently, you've got very respected analysts like Bonnie Glaser saying, look, you other Americans have exaggerated what China's willing to do when it comes to North Korea. On the other hand, you've got people like Paul Hanley working in China saying, look at the dual-use technology agreement. China's willing to start to clamp down in practical ways that matter, that can kind of limit the ability for North Korea to improve the capability of its systems, missiles and other systems. So very important ideas. Let's move on to Dr. Shin.
Thank you, Patrick. I also thank you, Asan Institution, for having me this interesting seminar and also holding this wonderful conference. This is a really global conference on North Korea issue. I saw many specialists from China, Japan, the United States, and Russia, even Australia. So this seminar is wonderful. Before I make my comment, let me crystal clear that I'm on my personal capacity do not represent any view of our government. This is very important because North Korea is very sensitive. Some misinterpreting endanger my job. So I think I will definitely make this clear. We have two wonderful presenters before me, and I liked all ideas they provided. So I think I just give 4 or 5 points we have to think about. I think we have a general consensus. This is probably 20 years or 20 years more than when North Korea's nuclear issue occurred. We recognize that. I started my career in 1995, right after agreed framework the next year. And then when I entered the KAIDA, Korea Institute for Defense Analysis, we used to think maybe North Korea nuclear issue might solved within 4 or 5 years. But even 20 years later, it worsened. But on the other hand, there is a bright side. When we first faced North Korea's nuclear problem, international cooperation, international coordination was not such strong as today. Today, although North Korea's nuclear capability is increased, international cooperation is getting better. That is, I think, a bright side. But we have many way to go. So to go there, to finally reach there, denuclearization of North Korea, we have to think about several things. First is, I think, to solve North Korea's nuclear problem, we have to think about the nature of North Korean nuclear issue. I think the nature of North Korean nuclear issue goes to North Korea's Kim Jong-un regime, former Kim Jong-il regime. Why? North Korea, on its face, it seeks a socialist country, but it makes emergency system, so-called Shulong, 대장, this day defense commission system. Why? They said they cannot afford to manage that kind of emergency system because of external threat posed by United States, posed by ROK. So, what if the threat disappeared? They cannot want to change their nature of regime. So North Korea fear the disappear of external threat. So they sometimes maintain provocation and using that rationale to developing nuclear weapon. So if we think about the denuclearization of North Korea, we have to think about the nature of a regime, and we have to hammer out best approach to the regime. I don't want to blame North Korean regime, but the solution must fit to solve that kind of regime. One is, as we know, the pressure. The other is persuasion, probably. I think the pressure also go for the regime, and the solution also benefit for the regime. That is probably the best way to solve this problem. I don't want to speak detail, but this is my first point in broad way. Second issue is that the way North Korea developed its nuclear weapon, including missiles and broadly WMD, they have money, so they can develop nuclear weapon. So we have to focus, international community has to focus, cut down North Korea's making hard currency with illegal trade. We sometimes found, and this year we found that in Cuba, they trade with Cuba. Recently there's a news report that North Korea tried to get uranium mine in Zimbabwe with this trade with the weapon. And I think the best way to cut down North Korea's making money, hard currency, is international coordination, international cooperation, not only with the United States, with China, but also as a globe, with Europe and with other peace-loving countries. We have to find out that kind of a source of making hard currency that will use developing nuclear weapon. Third one is, I think this is a very interesting point, as Patrick mentioned and Professor Chu mentioned. We need the way to cooperate more effectively. Regarding North Korea's nuclear issue, maybe the key player are the United States, China, South Korea, Japan, and Russia. But sometimes we blames each other. When it comes to the resuming of six-party talks, maybe China's point and US and ROK's point is different. So we have to solve that difference between among us, not even go before to the table with North Korea. We have to solve that issue. We have to cooperate that issue among our countries, US, China, Korea. So I think we need more dialogue. We need more cooperation. So I think Gordon mentioned the kind of coordination, the necessity of coordination is very important. And I also hope to suggest that unilateral coordination is very useful. Sometimes there's a need to meet among us, US, Korea, China, or US, Korea, Japan. But when you meet the US, China, Japan, China might have a concern. But when we meet the US, Korea, China, Japan might get concerned. I think that's unnecessary. If we make a more unilateral dialogue, I think we can have a better chance to understand each other and find a better solution on North Korea issue. So I think we have more dialogue on North Korea. with regard to this is my first point. Is I think there's our president, our foreign minister used to pointed out Asian paradox. In Asia there's many trade in economy, but security cooperation is rare. I think we have to get over the kind of dilemma. So I hope to make more dialogue among us, and we need, through that dialogue and through other dialogue regarding soft issues, we can make more practice. We can develop more habit of cooperation. Then, as a whole, with that kind of a habit and practice, we can build trust. So I think from this seminar, I think this is a very good forum to make that kind of a discussion, that kind of habit. So with this type of cooperation, we can build more trust. I will stop here, and maybe I can discuss more later. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Shin, thank you very much. You've raised some important issues, including the opportunity to coordinate on a 20th anniversary of the agreed framework next year, perhaps. More seriously, understanding the nature and even just the dialogue on the nature of the North Korean regime is a very important first-order question that constantly needs assessment and shared information and intelligence. I think it's very important to be talking about this issue. And you raise, obviously, the point of pressure and persuasion, including the ability to use new mechanisms of pressure. I know this is a topic for the next panel to some extent, but if Josh Pollack has made a very compelling case that indigenous production of gas centrifuges may reduce the leverage of sanctions and traditional measures for stopping proliferation, well, it may be that the international community has to keep moving forward with new ideas for financial pressure and other types of pressure. When you think about how North Korea might use debit cards, for instance, to, again, circumvent the kind of banking and any money laundering mechanisms that exist. The question about U.S. ROK China cooperation seems like a given these days. There's growing dialogue in these issues, but it does put a certain pressure on Japan. You said Japan should not be upset about that. I'm sure it's not a matter of being upset, but when, as Gordon Flake mentioned, when Korean-Japanese tensions are fairly widespread and limiting some of the cooperation that might exist otherwise, it obviously weakens that ability to fully bring Japan in to this dialogue the way that they might, because they have to contribute to these. And that's a segue really to General Professor Yamaguchi. It's on. It was on.
Thank you, Patrick. Let me also thank to the Asan Institute and Dr. Han for inviting me to this very important event and hosting this really important event. This is, in fact, this is my first time to participate in the conferences hosted by Asan Institute in the last 3 months. So this morning I talked to my wife and telling her that I'm going to speak at the conference hosted by Asan. You talk to them more than you talk to me. Then I said, well, they listen.
All right.
But anyway, I really enjoyed Dr. Shin's presentation, which is sounded very much encouraging and also forward-looking. I'm an optimist by training because I flew helicopter for 35 years without any accidents and survived. So I'm an optimist, but you, the Dr. Shin, might be much more optimistic than myself. And today I'm going to give you some Japanese perspective on international policy coordination on North Korea. And as Patrick and Professor Chu suggested, that there are problems with international coordination. There are problems with North Korea. And let me talk about two sets of problems. And first one is the differences in threat perception and policy priorities possessed by the relevant actors, such as members of six-party talks. And second one is difficulties in international policy coordination caused by mainly Japan's shaky diplomatic relations with its neighbors. So firstly, differences in threat perception over North Korea should be thoroughly addressed and be shared by major actors in order to form a consensus on policy priorities in dealing with North Korea. To me, the problems posed by North Korea include several categories, at least four. First category is a direct threat of long-range to short-range ballistic missiles along with its nuclear programs. That is one direct threat. And second category is threat to international efforts to prevent further proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons. Third category may be threat to the stability of the Korean Peninsula through provocation or conventional military threat. And fourth category is low intensity or non-traditional kinds of threat on the peninsula. So relevant actors such as the member state of the six-party talks may differ in their sensitivities on each aspect of threat or categories of threat, primarily based on their geographic positions and the diplomatic positions as well. This may lead the actors to have different policy priorities. For example, Japan seems to have more concern over North Korea's medium-range ballistic missiles, as I have stated above, as Category 1, a direct threat. Perhaps for the United States, Russia, and the nations with further distance from North Korea may have different the sensitivities on this. And this might cause Japan to play less. For Japan, we are kind of preoccupied by direct threat. So this might cause Japan to pay less attention on the global impact of North Korea's nuclear programs, as stated Category 2, and on the overall stability of the peninsula, as stated Category 3. In terms of ballistic missiles, Korea may have more concern than Japan over North Korea's short-range missiles, as well as artillery pieces, a huge number of artillery pieces deployed around the DMZ. In addition, Japan, China, US, China, and Russia may have different views on direct threat. The second set is more serious, particularly to the Japanese. The problems relates inherently to Japan's diplomatic relations with its neighbors. In short, unless Japan works out policies to reduce the extremely high tensions in the Japanese and Sino-Japanese relations, it seems impossible for Japan to cooperate with the ROC and Korea and China, and the two most important actors over the issues related to North Korea. And to soften those problems, Japan, including its public, should deeply, first of all, it should deeply understand and explicitly appreciate the fact that the ROC-US alliance has protected Japan's western flank for more than half a century. Actually, the last 70 years after 1945 was the exception for the Japanese security thinkers, without thinking about threat from through Korean Peninsula from the continent. Since at least 8th century, there was hundreds of more than 1,500 years. This is exceptionally peacetime at the western flank. We should appreciate it. In the meantime, Japan and Korea should acknowledge that the ROC-US and Japan-US alliances are inseparable for the security of the Korean Peninsula. Specifically, as the former directly deals with the contingencies on the peninsula, the latter will provide, latter means Japan-US alliance will provide real security and logistic support for the ROC-US alliance. As to the Sino-Japanese relations, the two countries have been in a hair-trigger situation since the government of Japan decided to purchase 3 major islands of the disputed Senkaku Diaoyu Islands in September 2012. As far as this tension remains high and dangerous as those posed by North Korea, Japan will not be able to seek cooperative efforts with China in dealing with issues related to North Korea. Tensions in the Sino-Japanese and ROC-Japanese relations have heightened during power transition periods. This is kind of important. Any incoming new administrations may have smaller room for diplomatic maneuver. In the case of Japan, fortunately, the Abe administration won the upper house election with a fairly big margin in July and gained political assets to implement its political agenda, including repairing the relations with China and Korea. Therefore, I really hope that the Abe administration places the importance on the improvement of relations with Korea and China. Put the emphasis on this in its political agenda. There is a small news, but I was in Tokyo last Saturday, and I attended the opening ceremony of Korea-Japan, the festival, to which Mrs. Abe attended, and it was very warmly welcomed by a huge number of people of Japanese in Tokyo, and huge number of Koreans were there. And yesterday, actually, I was at the National Defense Academy at Yokosuka, and the National Defense Academy yesterday celebrated the Korean National Day along with two other countries. We have over 100 foreign students. They are cadets from mainly Asian countries, including four cadets from Korea, while we have 4 Japanese cadets in Korean Military, Air Force, and Naval Academy, and they are making really good relationship with each other. Of course, they have problems to overcome. So, in case of China, last March, my students hosted the international conferences with cadets from 18 countries from all over the world, to which two Army cadets from the PLA represented very nicely and very persuadingly. So those small steps should be accumulated for the better relations for the future. Thank you very much.
Well, Noboru-san, I think your foreign ministry could learn a lot from your own activities in terms of trying to improve relations with both Korea and China, because as we've noted on this panel, the deterioration of relations between Korea and Japan are not only taxing the United States trying to stitch together constant cooperation, but there's an opportunity cost of not being ready for contingencies that we just don't know might happen because of North Korean actions or because of accidents or because of collapse or other unforeseen events. But thank you very much for those comments. You did mention how geography and distance does have a way of altering threat perceptions and priorities. I just came from Guam, and I'm very conscious of our new THAAD battery in Guam and also the B-52s that flew off in the exercises earlier this year. So when we think about sovereign American territory within North Korean missile range, yeah, we have it. We're right here with Korea, with Japan, with China, with Russia, and it does matter. It is sovereign U.S. territory. It matters. So it's not theoretical about the future reaching just the mainland of the United States. U.S. is a Pacific player here, and we all face this, even while we have different threat perceptions. And we heard one this morning that maybe from the heartland of Europe, it's not quite as threatening, but it may look a little different here. Anyway, we still have 45 minutes, or 35 minutes at least, for discussion from the audience. If you could keep to a couple of minutes your question / and comment, we can get more people to participate. So who would like to grab the microphone and enter the fray on this discussion on international coordination regarding North Korea? Sir, yes.
Hi, my name is Sam Kim. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg. Thank you for the very interesting discussions. I was especially interested in the discussions about the South Korea and Japan relations, and I was kind of wondering what you are thinking about the prospect or the probability of a summit between Japan and South Korea. I know the relationship right now is not as good as people would like it to be, but eventually, you know, President Park Geun-hye is gonna have to do something to mend the ties with Japan, and Japan does want the relationship to get better also eventually. What do you think is a way to get things back on track, the relationship back on track? What do you think the leaders should do? What do you propose the leaders do to start mending, fixing the relations? And also, just to add to that, why do you think the relationship became like this? I mean, what do you think is the single cause that? I heard someone talking about the Tokyo visit by President Lee Myung-bak last year, and there could be a different set of a lot of different factors. But what do you think is the cause of it, and how do you think it's going to be resolved? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Maybe I should just start, because I was participating in a trilateral dialogue on this issue, to say that there is a recognition of the national interest in both Korea and Japan about the importance of this relationship, very much as General Yamaguchi was, I think, emphasizing, and Gordon as well. But the lack of political will, the lack of incentive to take political risk, because of it's not popular in either Japan or Korea to put too much out politically to engage in high-level agreements, sort of like the GSOMI agreement that got scuttled last year for political reasons. And yet the mid-level cooperation continues. The national interest is there. So the way to walk it back is to take advantage of the multilateral meetings that are happening, like APEC, and to have meetings on the margins of those, not a direct summit, foreign ministry level, but then move it up to Prime Minister President on the margins of one of these meetings. And at least it means in 2013, you've corrected the error of the beginning of the year when there was a failure for a summit meeting, or the lack of an opportunity for a successful summit meeting, and you've created a strengthened Korean-Japan dialogue by the end of this year, and at least that puts it on a more positive trajectory. But I'd be interested in comments from everybody on what the cause of this was, and I think that's a tough issue because there's no one cause, but other views. And General Yamaguchi? Yes, we'll come right down.
I sometimes forget about the fact that I'm still paid by the government. But there are a number of problems, and there is no such a thing as a single problem cause the real the difficulties. But as far as ROK-Japanese relations is concerned, before thinking about how to think, we have to figure out how we feel. So that's the most, the closest kind of mentality between Japanese and Koreans. We feel before think. So we have to share the feeling. In that sense, I'd love to see Prime Minister Abe and President Park to show kind of gesture, political gesture, to the audiences in Tokyo and in Seoul, like Kim Dae-jun did in the late 1990s. In that sense, the Japanese owe a lot on the Korean side. So this time, it may be the time for the Abe administration to show the political gesture first, then invite the Korean side.
Okay, I once again speak my personal capacity. When it comes to North Korean issue, there is a strong necessity of cooperation between Korea and Japan. But frankly speaking, I think it's my personal view. I feel, as General Yamaguchi mentioned, the feeling first. The feeling was, in Korean word, 병 주고 약 준다, which means that give a disease first and then give a medicine. sometimes because of a text issue and history issue and doctor issue, we feel some sort of a disease. And then Japan tried to cure that. But the sincerity is sometimes does not touching to us. That my feeling is the source of a problem. So, of course, we have to build better relations, but I hope Japan do more efforts on that kind of a touching, and then we can make a better relation. This is purely my personal view.
Gordon?
It's very easy to look at individual events or statements and attribute them to be the problem. But if you look underneath it at some of the underlying causes, I think there's some interesting trends that are worth noting. Japan, for its part, probably has an increasing assessment of the importance of Korea to Japan. And we heard that in General Yamaguchi's remarks. Japan has seen Korea's remarkable success in democratization and in Korea's economy. And in an era where Japan is feeling besieged, post-3/11, with the Senkaku's issues, I think Japan increasingly looks at Korea and say, we agree on 97% of the issues globally. So Korea is a natural partner for Japan. And as a result, you see a desire on Japan's part for a closer partnership with Korea on a whole range of issues. In Korea, you have a trend line going the opposite direction, where Korea has seen 2 decades of the lost decades in Japan. They have bought into too much propaganda coming out of China, in other words, about Japan's era is past. They have seen Samsung pass all the Japanese electronic corporations, and Japan fall from number 2 economy to number 3 economy in the world. And so I think presumptively or too early, the Koreans have kind of said, oh, we don't need Japan very much. And so what you have a hard time doing right now is finding someone in Korea who stand up and say a strong, vibrant, economically, active and progressing Japan is in Korea's interest. A strong U.S.-Japan alliance is in Korea's interest. A Japan that's playing a proactive role in the region is in Korea's interest. That's a harder case to say because you have those divergent trends. And then on top of that, of course, you have these changes in the constitutions, assessment of the normalization treaty itself as difficult, and of course, the Korean president in South Korea has her own historical legacy issues tied into her own family and the role of her father in normalization that makes it very, very difficult. So, going back to this panel's topic and the fundamental question of what we should do, the U.S. has a role to play here. I think it's very difficult to see Park Geun-hye, agreeing to or pushing for a bilateral summit right now because there's this deep worry that Abe or somebody else is going to say something or do something and then she will be completely exposed because of her own personal background. So what I would like to see is I would see, and again, Patrick alluded to this, is President Obama host a trilateral kind of mini summit on the edges of an international meeting where, the pressure would be off, but then once they have met, they can move forward in that context. And so that's one minor step, but I think it's a very important one because as Patrick mentioned, there still continues to be remarkable work below the radar screen. What we can't do right now politically in South Korea is be above the radar screen, and so that's where the United States can help give President Park Geun-hye some cover.
Professor Shulong, there's no shortage of sentiment about views on Japan, but is there any debate in China about the Korea-Japan relationship? Is that an issue at all from a Chinese perspective? No. Not really. All right, excellent. Yes, sir.
Wise answer.
Russia will now enter this international dialogue.
From Russia, and my question about the lack of cooperation goes to Gordon Flake. You mentioned in your presentation about the security system in Northeast Asia. And actually, to build any system or security house, I would say in that case, you need some blueprint, or it better have something like a 3D vision of the house. And this open secret that United States consider their military political alliances with Republic of Korea and Japan as a pillars of their security and presence in this area. And the same, it is an open secret that in Washington and in Seoul, it is considered that after Korea unification, there will be these alliances and American troop presence will be continued, both in Korea and in Japan. And you also said that there is a lack of military cooperation between Japan and Republic of Korea. So finally, the vision, at least of many American and South Korean specialists of future security system, that there will be trilateral military political alliance of United States, United Korea, and Japan. Don't you think that Russia and China will be not very happy with such arrangement? For Russia, it will be some kind of a Eastern edition of NATO in Asia. And China also will see such security architecture as not very friendly or maybe a deterrent to China, to rise of China. And don't you see that even this key issue for coordination, because all parties don't see what will be the final results of efforts on North Korean directions. For China, there is suspicion that finally this security coordination will bring American troops on 1,400 kilometers Korean-Chinese border and also 17 kilometers Russian-Korean border. And Russia, by the way, closer to Korea than Japan because we have common land border. Japan, no. So we are much more concerned maybe than Japan about what's going on Korean Peninsula. So my question is that do you think that we need, first of all, and to be successful in our coordination on Korea, to have joint agreed vision of security architecture in this region, and without this joint vision, every side will remain very suspicious about final results of the process. Thank you.
Well, Gordon, I think the question is directed toward you. And
well, I'll start.
Yes.
I don't necessarily agree that we have to have a shared vision before you can move forward, because otherwise we'll never move forward. Right? In other words, if you look at the models that were considered, when we were looking at this Northeast Asian peace and security mechanism as part of the six-party talks, which Russia was chairing, that did not assume an end of the U.S. alliance structure. It did not assume a removal of those pillars. In other words, you can have a longer-term vision where we live in a Star Trek kind of world where we have a global confederation, but you don't have to hold that first before you can make progress towards a regional mechanism. So again, maybe this is a distinction between a system and a mechanism. I'm not sure of anybody out there, even the more visionary people, who believe that we're going to have a NATO-like construct in Northeast Asia. That's very difficult to imagine. But I don't think you have to have that vision to have a more practical vision, which is the U.S., Japan, Russia, South Korea, and the United States having a coordinating mechanism where we communicate better, where we reduce tensions. What is difficult to imagine is that type of a system where North Korea participates in its current context as a nuclear power. And so absent some fundamental change, I have often referred to North Korea as a hole in the Northeast Asian donut. It really makes any type of a regional organization difficult to imagine absent some fundamental change in North Korea or unification. But once you have unification, I think often too many people in this region assume that the continuation of the U.S. alliance structure in the region and the continuation of U.S. troops in the region are synonymous, and they aren't. I mean, for the United States to say that we would continue and have a vision of a continued alliance with South Korea post-unification is not synonymous to having 37,000 troops here or 28,000 troops here, right? It's a continuation of it. If you look at our alliance structures throughout the world, they don't all require the same troop presence. And I can guarantee you, in a post-unification scenario, the number of troops in South Korea and Japan would be reduced dramatically. And with that, again, I don't see that structure as being somehow antithetical to a mechanism for greater coordination in the region at large.
Shin, how do you view, what's your personal view of thinking about the future of ROK-U.S. alliance, how it affects even coordination today on North Korea? Do you see that as directly affecting, or do you see that more as it's an irritant, it's a concern, but it doesn't impede cooperation on dealing with the immediate North Korean problem, or does it?
Traditionally, the traditionally the ROG-US alliance is aimed for North Korea's threat, the attack, armed attack from North Korea, but we regard it developed as a global one, so as a strategic partner, so we can cooperate in the global matters. But in the long term, I don't know, our policy direction is not yet fixed, but in the long run, if there is a unified Korea, maybe at that time we have to think about the security environment and international relation with China, Japan, and of course the United States also do the same evaluation, and then there will be the decision. So I don't think it is premature to say we are going to do something even after 20 years or 30 years. But let me make clear is that the general relation with the United States is not only threat-based one, but also there is common values. No, if we make that continuous, there is many ways to cooperation even after the unification, even in the long-term future. And we have such a relation with China in the long run. So I don't think there is no fixed answer.
Mr. Chu, what about a Chinese perspective on this issue?
I think that is something in long-term future may not be quite urgent for us to discuss, but much more urgent today, I think, in China or in other Northeast Asian countries. Some people do have a strategic will, structural will about the issue, including North Korea. Now in China, a lot of people see North Korea in a strategic structure framework in Northeast Asia. Like on one side is U.S.-Japan, ROK alliance. On the other side, it's not alliance, but it's loose relationship among Russia, China, and North Korea. So for those people, they say why we should oppose North Korea, why we should put North Korea into other side, or even or abandon North Korea, why we face three countries as close alliance in the strategic structure. So this kind of thinking is strong, which limited the Chinese international coordination with others about North Korea. So strategic structure concept.
Excellent. Yes, sir.
Peter Beck from the Asia Foundation. I wanted to ask Gordon and General Yamaguchi and anyone else on the panel who'd like to offer their views. It seems like one of the strategies for achieving a real positive breakthrough in Korea-Japan relations, because like all of you, I'm very troubled by the deterioration in ties as someone with great admiration for both countries. One way to achieve a breakthrough would be for the emperor to visit Korea. And I'm wondering, why hasn't he visited Korea? He's visited China. What are the obstacles to having the emperor make a visit?
Noboru-san, what's the obstacle to having the emperor visit anywhere?
The emperor is
Are you advising the emperor?
not exactly.
No.
But we have to figure out when and how our emperor should visit Korea, and as soon as possible. And perhaps the people in Japan, particularly government people, I hope they are thinking about the visit of imperial visit. That is really the key kind of political gesture. Not so many LDP politicians can do that kind of thing. And I hope, because of Prime Minister Abe's reputation as a very conservative, actually not exactly, but he looks really conservative, and he has plenty of political asset now. So I hope he can spend some of the political asset to make steps closer to the imperial visit.
Dr. Shin and Gordon, just briefly, how would that be responded to if the emperor were to visit Korea? I mean, that would be well received, or?
I personally believe that the restoring ROC-Japan relation, I think the event doesn't matter. I think that we have to make a broader foundation among two people. So as I mentioned that, so we feel some hurt. So I think the kind of sort of a healing process is necessary, and then if we build a foundation, there is a possibility. But the sort of event-based approach, Emperor's visit, Abe's visit, that cannot solve the problem that located in ROC-Japan relations. I think a fundamental foundation is much more important.
Go ahead,
I
yes.
mean, this is a highly sensitive issue, but one that is important. I mean, there are potential roles that could be played in that process. So, for example, the emperor hasn't visited Yasukuni Shrine since the internment of the Class A war criminals, and so there's a precedence there that can be used in the Japanese context. One of the things I would kind of throw out for this audience in particular is that, I learned about Japan in Korea, because I was here as a young man, and so my perceptives were really skewed at the very beginning. But one of the things I think that Koreans tend to do is to view Japan as a collective whole, right? And so it's just Japan has done this. And so if you look at the question of the emperor, one thing I would kind of throw out that during the uproar at the end of the Lee Myung-bak administration about the visit to Tokto Takashima, the issue that got the most attention in Japan was not the visit of Lee Myung-bak to the island. It was comments that he was reported to have said about the emperor, because then all of a sudden it crossed into a line of Japanese feelings, which aren't often very considered here in terms of that notion. So I would just throw out one other just kind of insightful comment, hopefully, that if you look at what's going on in Japan right now, it's very easy to group it, every time there is a right-wing politician that says something or does something, the Korean media will report heavily on that one particular issue without talking about the tremendous debate and variance of opinions within Japan. And I would just give one example related to this. In the summer, Hashimoto Toru, the mayor of Osaka, said some really stupid, insensitive things about comfort women. And that was widely reported here, as it should have been. What was not widely reported was that the Japanese media repudiated those statements. The Japanese public rejected those statements. And in the election that followed shortly afterwards, not only did Hashimoto's own popularity go down dramatically, but his party, the Nihon Ishin no Kai, the Japan Restoration Party, was destroyed in the polls. And so what is widely been reported here as a very negative story could also be reported as a very positive story, that you have these nuances. And so for me, the emperor is precisely that type of an issue, whether it's, understanding the sensitivity on both sides. So there's a real need to have an understanding of sensitivity on both sides. But I tend to agree that these are not things that are going to be solved by events, that it takes real leadership. And to tie this back to our panel today, I mean, this is one of the areas where there should be no sensitivity about cooperation. There should be no sensitivity about a general sharing of military intelligence agreements with Japan. Korea has it with Russia. Why should we not be able to have it with another ally of the United States? It makes no sense, right?
Dr. Shin.
Yes, I think we should return to the main topic, North Korea, and our cooperation.
Indeed.
So yes, so now I hope to raise a question between to Professor Chu and Gordon that six-party talks is the core of international cooperation, I think. But there's a difference of view among us, China and U.S., Korea, about the preconditions reopening six-party talk. So I hope to raise a question, both of you, that is there any possibility to cooperate between China and United States, whether there's having prerequisite but lessening the current condition of United States suggest. Do you have any view on those issues?
I think the intention of Chinese Foreign Ministry or Chinese government that like to resume six-party talk as soon as possible. I think it's like as this. Chinese government believe that when there is the process of six-party talks, that these six countries engage, have meeting there. At this time, there are a lot of bilateral meetings, including between North Korea and the U.S. When they attend the six-party talks, then there might be some progress. So China would like to provide that kind of setting for multilateral and bilateral engagement. Then there may be progress on denuclearization and stabilize the situation in that. I think that is the intention. But as a scholar, my observation, I think it's not quite useful to have that kind of setting or process. Or even as history tells us experience, even there's likeness that there might be engagement, progress, agreement, but what is the usage of that? We are not lacking agreement. 1994 Framework Agreement, September 19 Common Statement. But North Korea abandoning those agreements. North Korea does not care about those statements. So I think the latter format process looks good, but does not provide anything serious, anything concrete progress on the issues. So myself, I thought about my government why it's so emphasized on the process and the format. Still hope that they can be reduced something to the real goal of denuclearization. As a person of my view on North Korea, I think there's no any hope that North Korea will keep its commitment on anything he decide and sign. Okay.
Gordon, it sounds like he's mirroring your view to some extent here, because you can get back to the six-party talks, but then the question is, so what?
I mean, if I am appropriately cynical for someone from Washington, D.C. these days, if you look at real international policy coordination among the other 5 parties in North Korea, we are mostly characterized by our lack of new ideas, lack of energy in the issue, lack of willingness to invest politically on this, and that includes China. So to be very blunt right now, the United States does not feel any meaningful pressure from China to return to the six-party talks right now, because the Chinese are going through the motions. They're saying North Korea is ready, but the Chinese don't even believe themselves when they say North Koreans are ready, right? You can't make the case that North Koreans are serious about returning to the six-party talks, that North Koreans are willing to put up their nuclear weapons, or they're willing to abide by the September 19, 2005 joint statement. It doesn't make sense, right? So it's a game we have to go through, and the Chinese have to say, come back to the six-party talks. But again, I don't believe the Chinese themselves sincerely think there's a real opening right now. And the U.S. as a result says, we'll think about it, we'll look at it. But there's no real pressure on this issue right now.
So Dr. Shin and General Yamaguchi, when you hear the lack of enthusiasm, but not closing the door, I mean, what should we be using this coordination for right now then?
I think, the problem with this approach is that during the deadlock of six-party talks, North Korea's nuclear capability is increasing. That's our concern. So I need more enthusiasm from China, and considering former behavior of North Korea, we need some sort of prerequisite, because they breached too many times. So we need to North Korea show some their sincerity. So that's the reason why I ask a prerequisite. But I don't know whether there is a golden way we can hammer together. But still, that is our concern.
A golden way or Gordon way?
Golden way.
Noboru Yamaguchi, do you have an idea here?
Yep. We have come a long way since maybe 1994. It's almost 20 years. We have not made pretty much success, but still we have been successful enough to at least freeze the issue. So in that sense, in the future too, if we can freeze that situation, or at least preserve the status quo for the time being, six-party talks can be utilized as a place to talk and place to be transparent. In the coming 2-3 years, it is really important for Korea and Japan, because Korea, the U.S. and U.S. Japan are going to discuss how those alliances should be for the future. So that may cause kind of anxiety among the member states out of three, I mean Russia, China, and North Korea. And if we can be transparent in that process, it may help reduce tensions over the peninsula.
I mean, Dr. Shin, is the Korean government keen to get back to six-party talks?
Yes, I think so. Of course.
We're almost out of time, and now suddenly we have hands showing up in the line with 5 minutes to go. Why don't we just take these quick comments, starting here. So you're going to have to be brief this time, and over here, just so we can hear all three of these comments very quickly. Oh, and we're going to go back behind you as well. Go ahead, Bill.
Brief. Bill Newcomb, United Nations.
Yeah.
And by the way, Gordon, thank you for the preview of the next panel. For Professor Chu, I have a fairly short question. I don't attend many conferences anymore, and so perhaps my exposure to this kind of argument hasn't been as great as I wish. But when I hear the Chinese articulation of its national interest with regard to the DPRK, I never hear its economic interest included in that explanation. And it seems to me that your economic interests do not lie with North Korea, which in effect, the events that it undertakes can depress your already difficult economic circumstances in the Northeast region. It can depress foreign direct investment. It can affect the investment into South Korea by Chinese firms. It affects the stock price on the markets. It causes just continuing difficulties in the mid to longer term if this continues. Can I take 1 more minute?
Go ahead, hurry up.
And more specifically, you said last 4 months they're behaving better. In July, Chongchongang was seized by Panama. That's not behaving better. Panama's authorities were incensed because this ship posed a potential threat to the canal. What would China's reaction have been if the Panama Canal had been shut down by that ship?
Yeah. If you want to just pass the mic right behind you.
Thanks. John Delury from Yonsei University. It suddenly strikes me that 3 of the 4 countries' heads of state have actually visited Pyongyang. In particular, I'd like to ask General Yamaguchi if you could give us some context, because I've heard different explanations of the Ijima visit and sort of how to interpret that. That's an example of some discoordination on North Korean policy. And of course, the South Korean Foreign Ministry had very sharp kind of rebuke of Japan for that. So I wonder if you could tell us more about where that stands with the abduction issue and whether that's something that's under consideration in the Abe administration. Thank you.
And just right behind you.
My name is Tong Kim from Korea University. I don't want to turn back the clock, but I want to go back to the subject of Japan-South Korea relations, just 1 minute. That is, if you share the view that foreign policy of any country is an extension or function of domestic politics, that exactly applies to both Japan and South Korea in terms of their domestic politics. So we got to see that, and whatever else, other minor views and so forth, and as far as what the United States might be able to do, as Golden Flake suggested, they can arrange a trilateral meeting among U.S. and Japan and South Korean presidents. That has happened, by the way, in Osaka and also in Las Cabos in the past, so they can be very simple. But that would not resolve the fundamental issues that arises from their domestic political needs from both countries. That's my comment on that. I want to move on to another area of international cooperation, since this session is about international coordination. That is, every policy wonk I know in this town says South Korea should maintain a strong military alliance with the United States. At the same time, we should keep improving relations with China so we can be Not saying they're going to switch from one side to the other. Nevertheless, nobody's talking about. There might come a time when tipping point actually happens in the balance of power between the United States and South China. That's happened as China keeps growing, whereas the United States is more and more. Well, it's doing a little bit better nowadays, but nevertheless, there's no guarantee. And trend is that China, not in a long time from now, but at some point, is going to pass the GDP. U.S. because GDP alone does not really make up with what constitutes a national power of each country. But nevertheless, whenever that comes, the best we can describe the relationship between China and the United States would be one of cooperation and a competition. But so far, let me put the area of where U.S. and
we're now in overtime, though.
Okay, overtime. Just I'll finish in just 40 more seconds. That's why I'm just speaking very rapidly. But nevertheless, I have to make my point. That is, right now on the North Korean nuclear issue, there seems to be a fairly good degree of coordination between Washington, Beijing, and South Korea. So, but nevertheless, but once you move beyond that, in relationship U.S. and China competition, and especially if you imagine, just like a report came out of RAND Corporation the other day, that if you suppose the collapse of North Korea, and if you suppose Chinese intervening in that case, and what ROC and U.S. and China would do, and a lot of people are talking about we have to start talking to each other to sort of prepare or come up with some contingency plan. I mean, there are some plans in different segments of governments in Washington and here too, but nevertheless not involving China so far. So how you see, I'm asking General from Beijing, how China can work on this kind of complicated issue?
Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you short because we are out of time. We've got time for just very brief response, and really Professor Chu maybe has the longest one, but Noboru Yamaguchi, you were asked specifically about the discoordination that happened earlier in terms of a visit to Pyongyang that didn't seem to be well coordinated, and maybe the role that the abduction issue was playing in an independent Japan priority policy, if you will, toward North Korea.
In fact, I agree with you. I agree with you, and there were several reports that saying that the Ijima's visit was kind of a breaking strike or the cheating. Japan should not cheat to gain some of the to solve the issue on abduction.
Dr. Shin, any final words? Gordon, any final words? Professor Shu, you're going to close the show here.
Okay, thank you. North Korea is not an economic issue to countries, including China. Might be to have to an economic interest issue to some business, enterprise, but as a national policy, there's no element of economic interest consideration. It's security and strategy. And the last couple of months, July, June, August, we do see that North Korea behavior relatively nicer than before. Not nicer than we like to see, because spurring they gave us so much the crazy words, rhetorics, so dangerous, blackmail, and then since June situation getting better, there was inter-Korean dialogue, resumption of the industry park, and the like to engagement with the others, we see it's nicer than before. And China-US competition, this is no words in China. Nobody in China talking about US-China competition. We know this is words in here, in Asia and in US, because the Chinese, including leaders, officials, academics, we never thought that we would compete. We like to compete with the US. We see we are different power. US is superpower. We are not a superpower. And we are satisfied with our role in Asia, in the world. We are already a major power. We are already one of the centers in Asia and in the world for thousands of years. So there's no goal, no intention, no strategy for China to compete. If U.S. Act as a global leader or major power, it's fine to us. We are just opposing U.S. interference in our internal affairs, like Taiwan, Tibet, or take part on Diaoyu Island or South China Sea. As long as the U.S. would not damage Chinese own national interests, U.S. role in Asia and the world is fine to us. So there's no competition.
Well, I think we can see with international coordination, there's no shortage of subjects to discuss. Whether it can have an effect on North Korea is a big question that remains even at the end of this panel. Maybe the next panel on smart sanctions will give us some of those answers. In between, there'll be a coffee break. But first, please join me in thanking the panelists. Thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you.